Mighty Men's Conference 2012 saw the lives of men changed across Australia. In Tasmania 2013, we want you to be a part of it. Men, it's time to take a stand. Here is some of what our mate Brad shared last year.
It's a stand. I believe the revival starts with men who stand. And that's why God blesses, and there is an anointing over MMC of God's moving, because it's an opportunity where a man can leave this event and turn it into a lifestyle where he stands for Jesus. And the moment that happens is when there's a transformation, not just at a service, but in your life. The greatest sermon that the world will ever hear, the greatest sermon that Launceston will hear, the greatest sermon that your wife needs to hear, the greatest sermon that your kids need to hear will never come through a microphone behind a pulpit at a church. But the greatest sermon they'll ever hear will come from the man in the house who stands up and says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Isn't that the truth? That's the sermon that your wife is dying to hear you preach. Not to tell her more stuff that she needs to change this and change that, but when you come home and say there's some things that have changed, and they've changed in here. The first time I ever went to Mighty Men's, 2008, I believe that was the first year around then in WA, the Friday night. And as Angus was preaching, God was speaking. Because God's the one who speaks at these conferences. They say no big name speakers, but God speaks every time. That's a pretty big name. And I remember sitting there, and Angus, the very first one, you know, the first thing that happened after that sermon, I went straight out the back to a very lonely place, as far away as I could get at the end of that message. I got on my phone, and I rang my wife, and I apologised. And I repented for the things that were in our house and in our family. I said, you know, babe, I just need you to forgive me, because there's some changes that are going to be. And things started to change in my life. You know, that same year, the next night, the Saturday night, I was sitting front and centre and a few rows back next to one of my good mates. And he was just one of my good mates. He goes to church, was a Christian guy, had his family going to church. Everything just seemed good. Loved the Lord and played footy with the boys. Everything was just good. But that night, as Angus was speaking, but God was speaking. That night, he went forward and did some business with God, and I'm like, he must have some stuff going on. And later I found out, in talking to him, that he had a life going on, a secret life of drugs, a secret life of nightclubs and different sort of partying behind his wife and family's back, while still having the Christian appearance, or still a form of godliness, some stuff there, but he had this other stuff going on. And it was at a Mighty Men's event where he went back to his home and he asked for forgiveness and he repented of his sin. And he said, babe, I don't know what happened to the old husband. This is the way I saw it. There was like one man that went to that conference, but I tell you what, the man that came home was not the same man. And he started a men's breakfast we had in Mucka, and he came up and ran it, and just now has such a heart for ministry and a heart for his family and a heart for what God's doing in and through his life. Why? Because we're in an opportunity. We're in a time and a moment where we can choose to respond to what God is doing and to stand, because revival starts with men who stand on.
Mighty Men's Conference 2013, Island Revival, February 22nd to 24th at Coralline, Scout Island.